Welcome back, family. I'm so happy and thrilled to introduce my dear friend, Peter Weng. Peter is the CEO of the Center for Healthy Minds, based out in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, actually, where he's tuning in from. And while he has spent most of his professional career devoting his life to serving systems and to help them thrive and enhance their well-being, he has worked historically at Google and Search Inside Yourself, but he's also just become an incredible, beloved leader in the field of mindfulness and well-being. I've had the great fortune of meeting Peter several years ago at a conference, and he's now become one of the precious gems in my life who I lean on, both with our wonderful friendship. We carve out space and time to connect at least once a month just to catch up. I learned so much from him. And if you don't know this about Peter, he's an incredible dancer. And if you think he has moves on the dance floor, you should see him on roller skates. He has even more remarkable moves on roller skates. So a fun fact about Peter that you wouldn't otherwise know reading his bio or sometimes getting to know him even through these sessions. He has remarkable moves. Maybe he'll dish out a couple for us today. But it is just with so much love that I introduce a man of many talents, heart and wisdom, who will be offering and leading today's session on exploring our relationship with thoughts and emotions. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much, Rose. And it's so wonderful to be here. And yeah, it's such a pleasure and to be part of the Ivy Child world. Rose has just been such a wonderful spirit in my life and has really done a lot to support me as well. And it's really great to get to be here today. And I was thinking about the progression of the day, and I feel it's a really natural progression. We had Sara introduce the beautiful breath practice and thinking about kind of an important way to relate to the body and using the body to allow us to access kind of a mental peace. And Dharma's beautiful teaching around food. And I really liked the way Dharma called out to just notice how your body feels based on the food that you're consuming. And again, to really think about how do we use the signals from our body. And we will also now be looking at thoughts and emotions and how do we process them and how do we work with them. And if you think about emotions, they're really a physiological function. They're something that just happens in the body, that are body function. And how do we work with that? And how do we allow ourselves to have emotions not take over ourselves in a negative way, but be something that, the positive emotions, we can sustain them and enjoy them and appreciate them. And the challenging emotions, we can work with them in a way that actually helps our learning. So I think that's what we really want to look at this point. I wanted to actually take a moment to think about some concepts around the current state that we're in. Rose actually likes to call this out around the Chinese word for crisis. And so I thought I would talk about that briefly. Actually, this is something that struck me. It's very interesting. I grew up in the US. I grew up outside of the Boston area, very close to where Rose is. And I remember always finding it very surprising being Asian American. My parents are immigrated from Taiwan, and how there was this beautiful Chinese culture that I was raised being aware of. And it was so kind of denigrated in our American popular culture, and even more so now with kind of COVID-19, anti-Asian American discrimination. And so I always find it very strange. And I wanted for us to just think about it a little bit and use or access some of that kind of real interesting and helpful insight from Chinese culture. And I thought we'd do a short foray into Chinese language. The Chinese language is, oh, okay. I cannot screen share. I will just talk to it. one of the points that Rose likes to call out, and I wanted to share also, is that the word crisis in Chinese is actually made up of two characters in the Chinese language, the word for danger and the word for opportunity. So the word for crisis in Chinese is weiji. And so it is a danger in the sense that we are under threat, and we are under threat from a number of different perspectives right now in our world. Unfortunately, long, medium, and short term, all are in crisis situation. And there is an opportunity. I was thinking about Maya's comment first thing in the morning of how this is a time for us to think, and Maya was calling out a revolution. This is a time for us to think about how can we transform, what can we transform in our society, what can we transform in ourselves. And this is something that we can really explore at this time. So what I wanted to call out is thinking about how do we work with our thoughts and emotions in a way that is supportive for us. Rose mentioned, I run Healthy Minds Innovations. It's an organization that came out of a neuroscience lab. And the neuroscience lab did some of the very earliest work of looking at how meditation practices impact the mind. One of the things it was hooking up monks to sensors and probes and scanners, and seeing that actually the way that we use our mind actually changes the physical structure of the mind. And so we can do long-lasting impact for the positive in the way that we use our mind and the things that we practice. There are 4 key components of mental well-being that we think are really critical. They are awareness, connection, insight, and purpose. So awareness involves being fully present and aware of the experiences that we're having. Mindfulness would be an important component of this. A great example would be the breath practice that Sara was leading, being fully aware of what's going on. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with respect to also kind of our emotional reactions. Connection is looking at how do we connect with others? Can we connect with others with a spirit of compassion and empathy and understanding, and look to further improve relationships? Insight suggests that we can look at the things in our lives with a kind of spirit of curiosity. Can we explore the kind of narratives and the logic and the stories that we tell ourselves in a way that allows us to see them in maybe a more productive manner for us? And then purpose is for us to consider how can we stay connected to our values and stay connected to our long-term life purpose, but also things that are important to us in any given day. How can we do that in a more consistent manner? So right now, what I wanted to talk about for us today and explore what we're going to do in practice is think about when challenging things come up, and how do we work with them in a way that doesn't hurt us in a long-term manner. One of the things that I think about is obviously I think on all of our minds right now is if you think about impact of kind of racist actions. This reminds me of back actually, I was thinking of an example from my old life. I used to work in factories before I started working in these like cushy office jobs. I worked in factories for many years, hard hat, steel toe boots. And the one thing that I actually kind of liked, it was much more straightforward there. And sometimes folks, actually were overtly racist. Sometimes in the current environment, I feel like people have had in the office environments, people have had enough training that, they won't say something directly, but they'll hurt you or, do discriminatory actions in other ways. If they say something, they're very apologetic, but they're much more straightforward. At least I found it in the past when I worked in factories, and I kind of like that better. And I always remember one of my colleagues actually was, he was actually quite racist. And I remember he said in a group, we were having a lunch, and he said something racist, about Asian Americans. Of course, he used the word Orientals, and he tried to. It was bad enough that he tried to apologize to me later. And I remember I was younger. I said, look, I know you're racist, and I said it in a much stronger way, but I was not really angry at him long term, and I was able to continue to work with him in the sense that I was able to think about him in a greater sense, in a larger narrative, while I still did not condone the action at all, right? And I didn't give him a break on it either. And that's kind of what I want us to think about. Can we think about, the greater narrative? And, if I thought about him, it's really his perceptions of the world were driven by ignorance. He, he was always living in kind of somewhat isolated communities from a diversity perspective. And communities that came from actually quite a bit of suffering as well, which then allows me to think about it, even though, again, I don't endorse or condone or accept the racist actions. I also feel like I can have compassion for him. It reminds me of, I used to volunteer in prisons, and we were volunteering. I was working with a group that had just come out of a very violent period within the prison system. And we started talking about compassion and wanting to alleviate the suffering of others. And I kind of got stuck, and I said, I don't know if this is an appropriate topic for us to talk about here right now. And one of the inmates was a very long-term meditation practitioner, spent a lot of time in contemplative practice, actually, in the prison system. And he thought about it and said, actually, compassion is always the right response. And that kind of blew me away to think about it. I mean, I was terrified of the experiences what those guys had to deal with every day. And for him to be able to say that really struck me. And I remember taking that back home to myself and thinking about it. And there's somebody that's I know that's been trying to kind of hurt my extended, like my father and my sister and myself, and it really is I find it very upsetting. But if I think about where that comes from, if they were not such an unhappy person themselves, and they were not always struggling in life, I do feel like they would not actually be trying to hurt us. So I can think about compassion even for people that I find very problematic and have behaviors that I strongly disagree with. And so that type of narrative, at least for me, can allow me to not have the kind of those bad actions kind of hurt me internally, and I can try to not let them internalize within myself and continue to fester and provide me the energy to continue further. So while the actions may still happen and are painful and create a strong immediate emotional reaction, long term, what we're going to try to do is think about how do we process over the long term so that they don't allow us or they allow us to then move to a point of being productive in the way that we relate to our own emotions. And this will allow us to have the energy to continue and to do the work that we care about and put our attention to things that we feel are important. So that's really what the practice that I'd like for us to do today. So what I'd like us to do today in the practice is spend at least a little bit of time at first. We're going to look at something challenging that happened recently. And I'd like us, if you want to think of something right now, I'd encourage you to think of something that is challenging, that has happened recently, challenging but not traumatic. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe, a 6 or 7. Please don't. I don't think we have enough space or time and a good environment to do something that is like a 8 to 10 level. Something more that was annoying and frustrating, but not necessarily traumatic. And then we'll also spend some time thinking about what's really important and what's important to us. And so I'd like us to spend some time thinking about both. So I'd like us now to do a practice together. I'd ask you to find a way to sit that allows you to be alert but relaxed. Actually, I'm going to shut my window. I heard some noise coming in earlier. And so if you can find a way to sit that allows you to be alert but relaxed, you can close your eyes if that helps. If you prefer to keep them open, I'd suggest averting your gaze down with a soft focus. And let's settle into this position. Let's take several deep breaths and just settle into this position. And using the practice from earlier, see if you can notice and pay attention to the breath. Let's take several deep breaths. Resuming normal breathing. I ask you to just spend a moment and notice how your body feels. Just observe how the body feels. Now I'd like you to consider bringing to mind a challenging incident, something that happened that was challenging recently. Again, I'd encourage you to consider something that was frustrating, but not severe, not something that was traumatic, but a challenging situation recently. And I'd like you to replay and kind of revive this experience and remember the details of this situation. And I'd like you to also see if you can notice your emotions. Do you notice how you feel as you're remembering this situation? I encourage you to consider how your body feels. As emotions are often expressed through the body. Notice the state of your muscles. Are they tense in certain places, relaxed in other places? Just notice the muscles. Notice any other sensations that may be in the body. Do you feel heat or energy in certain areas of the body? Now I'd like you to still consider this situation, this challenging situation. And I'd like you to consider, are there other broader narratives to think about? If you think about the main viewpoint that you had in perceiving this situation, your own story around it, are there other ways of looking at it or other things that come into view here? Maybe taking into account other points of view, other societal implications, maybe other implications for yourself outside of this immediate situation. And ask you again to consider if you can notice your emotions. Or notice how your body is responding. Again, the state of the muscles in your body. If you feel heat or energy in different places in the body. Now I'd like us to move on to thinking about things that are important to us. And so to transition, one way to allow us to get rid of the energy of the challenging situation, you may want to tense your muscles up and then let them relax. So carefully tense your muscles and then let them relax. And we can again take several deep breaths. and for an opportunity to reset and remind ourselves on the power of the breath and the support we can gain from paying attention to the breath. I encourage you to take several deep breaths, noticing the breath. And ask you to resume normal breathing now. And let's observe the breath just for a couple more moments, with normal breathing. Now I'd ask you to consider what is important to you. What is important to you in your life right now that you would like to devote most of your energy or an important part of your energy? What is important to you to focus on right now in your life? As you think about what's important to you, I'd like you to consider what emotions you notice. And how these emotions may be manifesting themselves in your body. What is the state of your muscles? Are some tight or relaxed, and where? Do you feel heat or energy in areas of the body? And I'd like to ask you to consider what is something you can do to support this area that is important to you. Thinking about what is important for you to focus on right now. Is there something specific you can do in the next week to support that? I encourage you to commit to doing that, and as specifically as possible, set a time to when you will do this action that supports what is most important to you right now. With that, I'd like to close this practice. Bring your attention back to our discussion. Feel free to open your eyes if you have them closed. And thank you for joining in that practice. So this practice that we just did together was twofold, though there's one consistent theme across both, right? The consistent theme is exploring what our emotional reactions is, looking with awareness at how our emotions are showing up in our body, and then and paying attention to that closely. Now, with the challenging emotions, one of the things that we are encouraging is to consider, is there a broader narrative? Is there, the immediate issue at hand may not be changeable, but is there a broader way of looking at it, and is there a broader way of addressing it so that the pain, the immediate pain from whatever the situation is, does not become a long-lasting, festering pain internally, that we don't take something and internalize it and allow it to cause us long-lasting impact that is negative. Hopefully we can learn from it and progress and use it, but also, can we think about the way that it engages with us in terms of how it impacts us internally. And then, can we have enough space to make sure that we put energy on things that we feel are important? And can we then make sure that we focus and don't allow that to escape us, appreciate the emotions that it brings to us that are sustaining and encouraging and positive, and don't let the challenging things distract us from what is important and what we feel like we want to work on, what is important to us to work on. And then this practice you can do at any time, parts of it or the entirety of it. Again, the intention is to just think about how we work with our thoughts and emotions. And I would encourage you to explore different aspects of this practice. If you are interested in more of this, looking at this framework of awareness, connection, insight, and purpose, you feel free to look our organization, Healthy Minds Innovations. We have a website. We also actually have developed an app that we've made freely available. It's supported by donation, and it is called the Healthy Minds Program. And that is on, for iPhone, it's on the App Store, and for Android phones, it's on the Play Store. Again, it's called the Healthy Minds Program. So I would encourage you to explore this area more of looking at how do we support our own mental well-being through the ways that we look at our own experiences and processing our thoughts and emotions. At this point, I want to open it up if there are any questions.
Yes. Peter, how can we navigate our state of rage during this time without coming across as a rageful person of color to the world?
That is a really hard one, I have to say. I mean, I have definitely been in a state of rage at times and not always been able to communicate well. So I think that is I will make some comments on how to do this, but I also feel like sometimes you may not be able to. I mean, I have to say, I can't always do it. So a couple of things that I would suggest. One of the things that can be really helpful is this practice of, excuse me, I'm gonna sip some water. is of noticing the body. So one of the things that we did in this practice just now is, we're paying attention to how the emotions are expressed in the body. And so pay attention to what anger and rage looks like for you and what it feels like in the body. This again, it reminds me of in Dharma saying, when you eat something, pay attention to how it reacts in your body. When you have an emotional reaction, notice what it feels like. So for me, when I'm really angry, my face gets flushed and my jaw clenches, and actually my hands clench, and my kind of upper body tenses up. If I notice that, then I understand I am very angry. And if I can, and there are times, I was in a large kind of community meeting recently, and something came up that was actually quite rage-inducing for me. And I noticed that, and I realized I could not say something right at that moment. If I did, it was going to be very angry. And thankfully, someone else said something that was kind of trying to educate the group. And I noticed my anger, and then I was able to kind of help process the anger. In fact, I use breath practice, kind of what Sara was teaching earlier, to help kind of reduce the anger level. And then later in that session, I was able to say something. I kept my comments short because if I said too much, I was going to get into a pretty angry state. I kept my comments short to what I felt was the most important thing I needed to say. Other times, the other strategy that I would suggest is putting a marker. It's a place marker. If it's a group that you are going to be ongoing with, it's not a one-time thing. There are times where I may just say, hey, I would like to have a discussion about this at a later time, and not have it discussed now because I'm not in a good state to talk about it. And so that's another way to not let the moment pass, but then raise it as something that's important. So I think there are two strategies. One is trying to modulate the emotion first, and the other is to put a marker. So those are two suggestions that I have.
Thank you so much. Folks are just giving you some affirmations. Teresa says, wonderful session. Thank you so much. She has to leave early, but thank you, and looking forward to continuing to explore your offerings. We'll give a couple more minutes as folks continue to drop some questions in about your practice and about your work. What are some daily practices that you implement to continue with balance, with managing that rage, with meditation and mindfulness? What does your practice look like?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that I like to do. I was meant to mention it earlier, but I remembered it. This reminds me. One thing I like to do is, so one is contemplative practice, so meditation practice, which I feel is, there are many forms in which you can do it. The most basic, I like sitting meditation, where I sit and I do different types of meditation practices. Again, the one we did this morning, breath focused, is one. I like to do open awareness practice, which is kind of, you basically try to observe just what's happening at the exact moment. Compassion practices, where you focus specifically on trying to wish well-being on others. It's interesting. Actually, I don't like to do those as much, but I could use them more. So I try to force myself to do compassion practices. I tend to gravitate towards the open awareness and breath practices. One of the other practices that's important to me is journaling. I actually I have my journal right here. I have a very funny way of journaling, but so you may not want to do it exactly the way that I do it, but it's the general principle is to me what's interesting. This is actually my journal. It's this is a month of my life, and the way that I do it, this is every day I record kind of what there's a couple things that I track. And the reason I do this is then I look at the end of the month and see if I'm living the way that I want to live. So I track what I'm doing, things that are notable to me during the day. I track what time I go to sleep, what time I wake up in the morning. I track if I have like injuries. I track like meditation practices. And then in the back of the journal is where I do kind of general reflections. So this is more like normal size text. And this is every couple of weeks. I just write about things that are on my mind and things that I want to process and think through, maybe a challenging situation, maybe an interesting thing. And so that I find is a very helpful practice for me also of trying to process kind of what's going on for me and try to keep track of, am I living in alignment to the way that I want to live? And then the third one that I do is, it's not really, I guess they're all within the realm of well-being, but I do try to do, actually there's two aspects of it. One is I try to do something that I find really joyful every day. And so, Rose mentioned I'm a dancer. I used to be a semi-professional roller disco dancer. And so that will count. That counts as something that's very joyful for me. Or, at this point, within the pandemic, you're just going for a walk outside and being in the fresh air, that will count. So trying to do one thing that's really, I find that brings me lots of joy. And I guess the subset of that is I do try to get outside, somewhere outside, of the house at least once a day as well. Particularly, within the recent circumstances, it's good to try to force myself to do that. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love the month at a glance. That's something that I look forward to implementing. Thank you for sharing that.
It'll be fun. It's really interesting, actually.
Yeah. And another question, can you speak to the value of social support and gatherings like this in building community to train ourselves to develop optimal well-being, even during our current times of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's critical, actually. There are many ways of looking at it that kind of, we're social creatures. This is, we live in a society. This is the way that we interrelate with the world. And so I feel that this is, it's really absolutely critical. Our real learning comes from each other. And so even though that we are in this really strange system right now, I feel it's really important to try to connect. I know for myself, I initially, for the first period, all of the pandemic, all I did was work, and I was not really engaging with my that kind of support community. Fortunately, work is a kind of interesting place for me, so we have an interesting explorations at work. But I was kind of cutting that off, and I feel it's very important, and so I really am focusing on doing that outside as well. Rose mentioned we have a monthly call that to try to connect, and I'm connecting with other folks, and I feel it's really kind of critical for individual development as well as kind of progress for us as a society, really.
So support and community, especially spiritual and social support, so important. We have an inquiry from Monique. Where can we find a video of Peter disco roller dancing? #joy.
Oh, all right. I think if you go to YouTube and you search for my name, which is Peter Weng, it's Weng. I think Peter Weng. I think that'll just show up if you just search my name. But if you want to be more specific, I think Showcase after that. It's from a couple years ago in San Francisco. We used to do these fun outdoor things. So there it is.
Thank you so much. One last minute for some folks asking questions. I also wanted to just share with folks listening in, if you are currently watching, to be sure to continue to use the hashtags Together We Thrive and then #Breathe Together. If some folks have been posting on social media, feel free to add those to your posts so we can see them and celebrate joining together. Keisha also just found the YouTube link and dropped it in there for folks. So you're gonna have a roller, a disco fan club going. And I'm gonna just pause there for a moment to see if anyone else has any questions.
You know, since we have time, I'll comment. Yes, I think that video, I think I've got a gold, or I got a hat and I got a gold lame cape on. And it was funny because I was reviewing some pictures from when I used to travel with a dance company and perform. And it was a hip hop group that I performed with, and I was on my roller skates. I was kind of the novelty act, and I had a gold lame kind of outfit on. So I realized, you know, an important theme and maybe an important takeaway that's more important than my teaching is gold lame never goes out of style. So.
Rose, loving your share, helpful. Sasha, this video is amazing. Nikki, amazing. Nakia, Keisha is the real MVP. Vivian, I roller skate too, brings me joy. Trying to get on your level. Cassandra says, thank you for all of this great information. Awesome. Was there any way that you, in particular, you wanted us to close this session? Oh, one more affirmation before we get there. Sherwa says, thank you for your authenticity and honesty with how you've dealt with emotions/thoughts and how it is a continuous process for all of us, not something to get right or wrong, but to strive toward improvement, self-compassion, and joy.
Wow, that's a great statement. And in fact, I think that's a wonderful way to close. I think that's a great summary, and I couldn't have put it better myself. So thank you for that comment as well.